Hi everybody, my name is Sinead Curran. I'm a chartered physiotherapist and I have a special interest in bone health and osteopenia and osteoporosis. I have Aoife MacDonald here with me. Aoife is a registered dietitian and she is registered with Caru. And Aoife is going to talk to us about nutrition for bones and nutrition for building healthy bones, keeping them as robust as we can and getting the building blocks right. We know that bone tissue is constantly changing and bone is a living tissue, so it needs to be fed in order to stay well, like our body as a whole. So Aoife, how are you?
Hi Sinead, I'm good, thank you. It's good to see you again. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Likewise, hopefully our internet connections will stay nice and stable.
Yeah, fingers
Um,
crossed.
and look, if they don't, they don't. We'll just have to be creative with some editing. So, Aoife, if you wouldn't mind just talking to us about nutrition for bones, and I think most people, not necessarily everybody, most people will be aware that calcium is really important for bone building. Could you just talk to us a little bit about where we get calcium from, how much of it we need, what it is, what it does, and how important it is to us?
Yeah, so as you said, most people are pretty aware that calcium is important for bones, but so calcium, it's a type of mineral, and we have about a kilogram of calcium in our body, and the majority of that is within our bones and our teeth. So that shows us just how important it is for, the proper functioning of our body in terms of bone health and also kind of other metabolic processes as well. So in terms of where we actually get calcium from, so most people will probably know that dairy is the main source of calcium in the diet. In terms of kind of nutrition requirements, it's recommended that adults have about 800 milligrams of calcium every day. So what does that actually look like in terms of our food? So if you think about a portion of dairy, we'd say a portion of dairy would be about 30 to 40 grams of cheese, around 200 mils of, and each of those portions of dairy will have roughly 250 milligrams of calcium. So that's why that recommendation is there to have, 3 portions of dairy a day. Because if you're having the 3 portions of dairy a day, then you're likely to be getting kind of close to that 800, and you'll get, if you're having those 3 portions of dairy a day, then you're more likely to be meeting your need for calcium daily. So that's really important. You can get calcium from other foods as well. For example, many foods are fortified. Also things like dried fruits like apricots, certain nuts and seeds as well will have some calcium in them. So there are other sources. But in terms of how well our body can actually use calcium from different foods, we know that the bioavailability, or kind of how easily your body can use calcium from different foods, is better from dairy products. So for example, we often hear that, leafy green veg are a good source of calcium. For example, in a glass of milk, you need to eat about 200 grams of spinach or 250 grams of spinach, which is quite a lot. And that's because the calcium in your kind of spinach and things like that, it's not as readily available to your body because it has things called oxalates in them. And basically what they do is they kind of bind onto the calcium. So when you actually eat your spinach or whatever, broccoli and other green leafy veg, the calcium is still bound to the food. Your body doesn't actually get the opportunity to absorb it. So that's why, dairy is the best source, because the calcium is easy for the body to use.
Okay. And for people who don't eat dairy either because they have concerns about their cholesterol or because they're vegan or for whatever reason it doesn't agree with them, dairy isn't part of their diet, do they need to be eating huge amounts of leafy green vegetables? Or if they're eating a little bit often and there's plenty of variety, does that work? Or do they need to be supplementing their calcium? Once we leave dairy out of the equation, is it very hard to catch up, or is it practical? Are there practical ways of doing it?
Yeah, so if you're avoiding dairy for whatever reason, the kind of best thing that you can do is kind of find an equivalent to dairy products in your diet. So if you're cutting out milk, then having, a dairy milk or an oat milk or an almond milk instead, or soya milk, having like a soya yogurt to replace that, and then having some sort, a vegan cheese or something like that as well. So you're going to get calcium from each of them. The important thing is to remember as well that they may not have as much calcium as your dairy products, and the calcium may not be as readily available. And also, if you're going for organic kind of milk alternatives, the organic ones aren't fortified with vitamins and minerals. So if that is the case, that you're choosing organic for whatever reason, then you may need to look at supplementing with just a calcium supplement to make sure you're getting adequate calcium from your diet. And similarly, if you are concerned about high cholesterol, so obviously the plant-based milks will be lower in saturated fat, so they are a good option, or else choosing lower fat dairy and just having it in kind of the recommended portion sizes, then that's generally what's recommended for cardiovascular health.
Okay, so again, if you're taking a dairy alternative, something that is a cheese or a milk alternative, should you look at the labels and see how much calcium there is per portion, or if you're taking 3 portions of a vegan cheese or an oat milk, will that be enough, or do you need to be a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more careful about the amounts you're taking in and actually read and calculate?
Yeah, I'd probably just take a look and see, because you might find that some different brands might have more calcium than others. So going for the one that has slightly more calcium over the alternative you're using, whatever yogurt alternative you're really, 50% of your RDA for calcium or whatever proportion, and you can kind of roughly work it out that way quite quickly. So it's definitely worth having a look at it. Okay,
lovely. And is it advisable, if you're not sure, to take calcium supplements, or is that something you should chat with your GP about? Is it something you can just do as a precaution? What do you feel about that?
Yeah, so in terms of calcium supplementation, it's probably still best to get advice from a healthcare professional. If you are taking a general multivitamin for whatever reason, most of them will have a good amount of calcium in them. But it's important not to, go into a health food shop and get, a mega dose of calcium and take that. So if it's only kind of a small amount of calcium, then that would be fine. But I advise against, very large amounts of calcium in supplement form, because, potentially very high levels of any vitamin or mineral can have kind of detrimental effects in terms of health. So I'd say always check that with a healthcare professional.
Okay, but if it's part of a multivitamin you're already taking and you've been taking for a while, then it
shouldn't be a problem, yeah.
Okay, lovely. And I suppose the other thing that people have heard about, we've all heard about over recent years, is vitamin D, and calcium and vitamin D going hand in hand. And quite often with bone health concerns, if somebody is prescribed calcium by their GP, they'll also be prescribed vitamin D, or else a combination of the two. Should we be eating them together? Does it matter as long as we're, getting them together, or does it matter as long as we're getting them? Do they have to be at the same time?
Yeah, so no, they don't need to be at the same time. So in terms of kind of dietary sources of vitamin D, there's actually very limited sources of vitamin D in the diet. So things like, egg yolks and liver and oily fish would have a bit of vitamin D, but generally it's difficult to get it from your diet alone. The main source of vitamin D will be from kind of the sun, basically on your skin, creating the vitamin D that way. That's where we get most of our vitamin D. So that's fine during the summer months, but in the winter months, generally people aren't going to get enough vitamin D. So we'd often recommend, particularly for vulnerable groups like, pregnant or lactating women or older adults, people with chronic illness, that particularly during the winter months, that they look at taking a vitamin D supplement to maintain their vitamin D levels. So the general recommendation is to take about 10 micrograms a day, which is equivalent to 400 international units, and that's recommended. And so the reason that we need to have vitamin D in our diet is to actually help with the absorption of calcium from the small intestine. So if you are deficient in vitamin D, but you're eating loads of calcium-rich foods, potentially that calcium you're eating is kind of going to waste because your body can't, absorb it from your intestine and use it. So that's why they're often given in a supplement together. But as long as you have a good kind of level of vitamin D in your blood, in your body, then you will be able to kind of utilize the calcium from the food you're eating.
Okay. The last time we did a talk, we spoke about protein, or predominantly about protein, and you sent on a few references for people to check out or to use, just for if they're looking for some practical information on how big, what they should be eating, how big their sizes, portion sizes should be, whatever. Would you mind doing the same? Sorry, I didn't explain that very well at all. Would you mind doing the same again if you have some reference material where people can see from a practical point of view, if you look at a plate of food, or you look at a main meal, and you're non-dairy and you're eating spinach, you're eating broccoli, how much should you be eating, what your portion size should be? If you have that to hand, it's, I suppose the dairy is relatively straightforward, and the measurements, the 3 portions a day, and that's relatively straightforward. I think it probably gets a little bit more complicated when we're looking for dairy alternatives or plant-based alternatives. From a practical point of view, what do you put in your plate? Do you have to eat like a whole field's worth of spinach in order to get any calcium out of it? So that would be, if you have that reference material, that'd be brilliant.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'll send those on to you after, and you can link them then below the video for people.
I'll put them on the video. Lovely. Is there anything else in terms of vitamins or minerals that are particularly important for bone health, for building bone?
Yeah, so in terms of kind of the composition of bone in the body, so about half of the body of the bone is made from protein. So protein is another important nutrient that we need to think about. So I know we talked a lot about protein in the previous video, so people can always go have a look at that in terms of protein. So we know that having a good protein intake is essential for good bone health as well. There are as well certain risk factors for development of kind of osteoporosis, or kind of poor bone density in the future. So things like, following very restrictive diets. Sometimes people maybe have a history of an eating disorder would have a higher risk of osteoporosis. Certain medical conditions like celiac disease or inflammatory bowel disease, kind of smoking as well is associated with lower bone density. There's other things to kind of think about, and of course exercise, as you discuss with your clients. Exercise, weight-bearing exercise is going to be important as well. Then in terms of like other vitamins and minerals, we know that actually phosphorus is another mineral that kind of works alongside calcium to form the bone. So it's not really one that's talked about very often, because we do tend to get enough of it in our diet. So it's mainly found in things like dairy, meat and fish, but also in things like oats, cereals, like soya products, and lentils and things like that. So that's another one that's quite popular. So and about 85%, yeah, it's not hard to find, but about 85% of the phosphorus in your body is in your skeleton. So it is a very, essential role of phosphorus in the body. Another one is vitamin K. So vitamin K is one that people tend to get enough of as well, but it's important for kind of increasing the rate at which calcium builds up in your bones. So the only kind of contraindication in terms of vitamin K is, if you're on warfarin or something like that, or blood thinners, it's not recommended to, supplement with vitamin K. Vitamin K is found mainly in like green leafy vegetables, and also in things like dairy products and meat as well. That's another one. And then the last one I'll mention then is magnesium, which is another mineral. And it's actually important for kind of bone formation, because it's needed for kind of the absorption of vitamin D as well, or the utilization of vitamin D. But again, it's one that generally people tend to get enough of, so it's not a major concern. But just to be aware that there's more than kind of just the calcium and vitamin D that get all the attention. But they're all kind of a lot of different minerals and vitamins working together.
Okay, so if for somebody who is who either has a history of an eating disorder going back to teenage years or their early 20s or throughout their lifetime, or for somebody who is older and they find that they're less mobile, their appetite is decreased, it's harder to get out to the shops to get a variety of foods. Would you say, from what you're saying there, it sounds like variety is important, and kind of what we traditionally know as a normal healthy diet is a normal healthy diet for a reason, because our vegetables, our carbohydrates, and our meats, fishes, chickens, proteins all have such a mix of vitamins and minerals in them that all those needs are met. But it is important that we are getting the variety. We're not kind of eating tea and toast or cheese sandwiches all the time for whatever the reason happens to be. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, so variety would be really important, yeah. So obviously if your diet is very restricted, you're only sticking to a certain number of foods, then it's very unlikely that you're going to be getting a good range of all the different nutrients in the different foods. So try like switching up your meals and things like that, like not having the same breakfast every day, trying to have, you know, a few different options for yourself and trying to include different fruit and veg with your meals, trying to have, you know, different nuts and seeds in your diet as well, which are really beneficial. So just trying to do lots of variety really is the main thing, and not getting stuck on kind of the same things.
Yeah, so, and you had mentioned in the other video that we did as well about the protein, about snacks. And so even if you don't have a great appetite, if you find your appetite has decreased, then just having a little bit of a variety of different things, maybe more often over the course of the day, rather than expecting to sit down and eat a full plate of whatever, a full-size dinner.
Yeah, so like if you are, you know, struggling with your appetite and things like that, like seeing a dietitian can be beneficial in terms of that as well. So often if we see somebody, you know, who might have a low body mass index or who's not really managing to eat full portions and may have lost a lot of weight, what we often do is, as I said, recommend little and often. So try to have, you know, a small meal every 5 to 6 hours that's going to be higher in calories so that you're getting the most nutrition as you can, and trying to go for kind of more energy or nutrient dense foods if you can.
Okay.
So instead of having all sweet foods, which are going to be high in calories but not necessarily high in nutrients, going for things like nuts or nut butters and seeds and things like that are very nutritious but also very high in calories. They can be really handy to incorporate, struggling to maintain your weight. They're a good source of, you know, good protein and calories as well. So they're a good option as well.
Great. And last question, I think. Soups and smoothies, are they as good as the full whole vegetable or fruit, or are you losing nutrients once you turn them into soups or smoothies, once you blend them?
Yeah, so in terms of the recommendations for our fruit and vegetables, it's recommended that we have a minimum of 5 fruit and vegetables per day. So it might be, you know, 3 veg and 2 fruits. And in terms of kind of smoothies and juices, it's recommended that we have the whole fruit if possible, because when you kind of blend down, you know, and make a smoothie, you put, you know, quite a lot of fruit in there, which you necessarily wouldn't eat that amount of fruit in one sitting. So although the sugars in your fruit and things are natural sugars, when you blend them up in a smoothie, you're kind of releasing them and they become what we call free sugars. So they tend to be absorbed very quickly into your bloodstream and can have effect on blood sugar levels. So particularly in diabetes, we definitely say to try to have the whole fruit and spread out your fruit portions during the day. Things like juices and smoothies can count up to once a day as one of your 5 a day. So 150 milliliters of a smoothie or a juice will count once a day. But anything more than that, it won't count towards your 5 a day.
Okay. And soups?
So yeah, so we'd say like they would still count. So in terms of how much kind of veg that soup might contain, recommendation is that we have 80 grams of vegetables would be equivalent to 1 portion. So depending on how much veg is actually in that soup, would depend how much of it is contributing. But like if you are someone who struggles to get in your fruit and veg and you really like soup and you like your vegetable soup, then definitely go for that. Then that will definitely kind of add to your fruit and veg intake, and you will of course get some of the vitamins and minerals in there. The only thing is that you might be missing out on some fiber, particularly if, you know, all the fruits or the vegetables are peeled and things like that before being added into the soup. So you may be missing out on some fiber. So still trying to include whole vegetables in your diet if you can. But if you like, you know, veg soup as well, will still be, you know, a healthy option, particularly if you make it yourself at home, because a lot of the ones you might buy can have a lot of salt and stuff added into them.
Yeah, yeah. Perfect. That sounds very good. Thank you very much for all of that. So a little bit of practical information to build on what we already knew about calcium and what we were learning about vitamin D, and then new information with some of those other minerals. And basically, bottom line being eat well, and then everything is pretty much taken care of. You don't have to worry about supplements. You don't have to worry about whether or not you're getting enough once you have the variety and once you have the fruit, veg, carbs and proteins. That it?
Good summary. Yeah, brilliant. So yeah, it's not people to get hung up on things. So if you're worried about your bone health, then if you're looking at your diet, if you're not having 3 portions of dairy a day at the moment, then just look at that, and making sure if you spend a lot of time indoors that you maybe are taking a vitamin D supplement as well, and then the rest of your diet is quite balanced and varied, then you're going to be getting enough vitamin D and all that.
Lovely, brilliant. Thanks so much, Aoife. We talk
Thanks,
to you.
Sinead. Talk to you soon. Bye.